So let's get started. Our first theme is engaging with creativity. We're going to hear from Jasmine Ramgotra, a former intern with formerly the Center for Creative Conservation at EarthLab, Christina Voigt, professor at UW and an EarthLab Innovation grantee, Lisa Hayward, a grantee with the former Center for Creative Conservation, Heidi Roop, a researcher with the Climate Impacts Group and also an innovation grantee, and Robin Agnew and her team, which is a innovation grantee team as well. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and introduce you to our first speaker, Jasmine.
You heard of the glass ceiling. And I've seen this in nonprofit work too when I was working in nonprofit. There's this concept called the glass cliff, where it's an opportunity that looks like this amazing opportunity to be in a leadership role or to advancement, and like you're going to break the glass ceiling, right? And what it turns out to be instead is an opportunity where you're actually being set up to fail. I mean, when we talk about structural racism, right? You look at structurally, who have we set up to succeed the most? Who have we set up with the most support? Who have we set up with the most experienced supervisors? Who have we given the most access to leadership? And who are we compensating the most and valuing, right? That's the key thing. It's like that's directly related to value. It's just this like double standard that we have where people of color have to be twice as qualified, twice as much experience, twice as many like degrees in order to justify that they should be value. That they have value.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see me. I want you to take a moment to notice your breath right now. Is it calm? Is it quick? Are you holding it? Beginning to notice what kind of feedback you're receiving based on what you just saw. How can we make seemingly abstract concepts like systematic racism and climate change affect learners on a feeling level? We live in a feeling universe, and engaging with people on an emotional level is the surest way to inspire change. But we need to show people where they can go from that feeling place, because emotion without action leads to stagnation. We can't talk about the environment without talking about racism. We can't talk about addressing climate change without talking about addressing racial inequity. This is not a side conversation. This is where the conversation needs to begin. And if you're feeling uncomfortable right now, that is good feedback. That is your body telling you from the inside that there is work that needs to be done. And that is the work that I do. Culture Shift creates media that is activating, and we use that as a catalyst to foster transformation and transformational workshopping. Because information plus emotion and intentional action will lead to real change. Thank you.
State. What we do know is that there are two big questions looming about sea level rise. How fast and how much? How much will there be and when? These are real world questions that real world people are asking to understand what this climate impact will mean for our communities. But we need to take those headlines and turn them into action and actionable science. We were a follow-on to a much bigger project, which was a multi-year effort that joined together university scientists, department agencies, commissioners, community members, and those really working to understand how to protect Washington's coast from sea level rise as part of a NOAA-funded project called the Washington Coastal Resilience Project. This project generated projections of sea level rise for 171 different locations along Washington's coastlines. But we needed to take those data and go one step further. We had localized projections that were produced in 2018. We wanted those to be actionable, and we realized as a team that we needed to do more to creatively communicate and increase accessibility to all of these wonderful data that the best scientists in the world produced. So we partnered up with some unexpected partners that we hadn't worked with yet, including Seattle Public Utilities and the Seattle Public Library, to basically take this science and communicate it using new and innovative tools. Here's an example of the spreadsheets that were generated and all the thousands of data points that you can get right at your fingertips on the Coastal Hazards Resilience Network website, as well as a website for the Climate Impacts Group. There are hundreds of spreadsheets rather, and thousands of numbers showing you what the probability is that sea level rise might occur at a given point in time for a given location. This wasn't working. So we went from this to this. Oopsies, going too fast here, folks, in my 3-minute timeline. We worked with Tableau to create an interactive data visualization that actually took those numbers and showed you these curves. So you could ask a question of the sea level rise science and generate a number. For example, what's the chance that there'll be sea level rise of 2 feet in South Seattle? Well, the answer is 95% chance that by the year 2150, we'll experience 2 feet of sea level rise. While this is interesting and these data and this visualization were intended for relatively technical end users, it still didn't help communicate the what's next. What does that actually look like on the ground? We know that under climate change, South Seattle residents will face 2 to 7 feet of sea level rise by 2150. That will alter what this landscape looks like today. This is an image from Google Earth. We want to know what that will actually look like and connect those visuals to places that people care about to help inspire action and encourage people to look into the future and act now to ensure that we can protect the places we love, the cultural assets we care about, and come together to hold decision makers and those investing in our communities today to ensure they're resilient tomorrow. This is an image of the Duwamish River watershed that's showing that it has changed dramatically from the mid-1800s to today. We know that it will also change dramatically in the future, and we're using virtual reality with support from the Seattle Public Libraries to help visualize that future. Our VR experience is coming soon. I know I should leave you hanging here, but coming in a few months' time, we will have a VR experience that will allow you to explore what's at risk with 2 to 7 feet of sea level rise. But importantly, while I don't have that visualization to show you and that VR experience to show you, I need to communicate that it is not simply a story of sea level rise when we think about what climate change means for our communities. These are stories we need to tell about environmental justice, the need for action, and we need to connect people to the real world here and now impacts of climate change. And we're using VR and these data visualizations in hopes of telling at least part of the story and bringing new voices to the conversation. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Voices Unbound and Amplified. My name is Robin Evans Agnew. I got Tom Kuntz, Christopher Schell, Sonia Duncan, Alexandra Dogby in the room to do a quick 3-minute presentation with you. Lovely to have you on board. We are under the title of Engaging with Creativity, which I absolutely love. The big question is, what would, if you could look into a crystal ball and remember how we were talking about the environment before COVID-19?
In a funny way, this project has preserved just such a space and time. What we set out to do was discover what groups of people who we don't usually hear from, what these groups of people thought their environmental challenges were. This was focusing on non-dominant groups or stakeholders who actually matter in many areas, but lack a presence and agency at the environmental decision-making table. So what we're doing is proposing to, quote, unbound the vibrant and new environmental knowledge of these non-dominant groups that are living in our region through a first-mile application of 3 low-tech and scalable modes of outreach, which we did for the project: postcards, pop-ups, and podcasts.
We co-located the pop-up activity, which is how we collected data, by setting up shop at different events such as the Tacoma Night Market with postcard collection in the South Sound region.
Okay, we collected 1,082 postcards, which is what this map shows. Most folks were from the South Puget Sound, and that was where our major collection pop-ups occurred.
Thank you, Sonia. And we actually collected over 157 different 98 zip codes in the Puget Sound area. So we thought we got a pretty good distribution all the way around. Wanted to just talk about some of the themes that we've been doing. We're still in the process of analyzing our data, but here's what the environmental challenges issue going on with the use of fracked gas on the tide flats. And then there were the whole conversations about ecocentric threats. These are threats that are located not to harm humans, but to harm the actual environment itself. And within that, we kind of broke it down. 2 big ones that people talked about a lot were pollution, plastic pollution, other forms of pollution, air, water, soil, and then also, of course, climate change, or people were still using the word climate warning. And there were a couple of items, 2 inside the data, where people sort of contested the idea that there are environmental challenges. And we really wanted to capture those because we're really kind of looking at an opportunity to kind of critically analyze how power relations are shifted in the conversation about environment if you have people, if you ever actually ask people about it. So there were some people that said that environmentalism is a liberal agenda. And we also had personal and individual tales of suffering, which we're still kind of piecing together in terms of how we move forward from that. Oh, I get, we get exciting. I guess the last bit that I'd say that was most surprising to me, probably wasn't to Chris, one of our colleagues in this, is this idea that crime was an environmental challenge for people, something that science hasn't really kind of bent their way around. But this is part of the joy of having an interdisciplinary study like this. People felt pretty powerless inside this, and we're certainly concerned about how some of the nature of environmental conversations have been politicized. Take it away, Chris.
Sure, and thank you, Robin. To close, this is Chris Shell again. Also working on the project, and very much we were kind of interested in at the beginning of how do we flip the narrative of what we consider to be an environmental issue, and very much as we've seen through these cards and as we're starting to see through the data, that what we considered to be an environmental issue in many of the closed circles to most of the people participating was that there were many other issues that need to be considered as well. So just as environmental justice teaches us the perspectives themselves, that understanding equality and equity within the system also means to understand how we improve our environment. They go hand in hand. So we're hoping for our future moves in this project to create that critical discourse, to use these data to better understand how differences in how people respond to and talk about different environmental issues correspond with how they're coping with those issues, and then also see how they blend as a function of inequality across the landscape to better situate ourselves in how we do this environmental justice work on the ground.
Thank you, Chris. And if you're interested in what's inside the postcards, stop by our podcast and you can listen to us discussing them. And we're interested in reaching out to other people inside this EarthLab audience to join us in a future podcast. So let me know in the chat line and I'll be sending the link out there. Thanks very much, everybody. Deeply appreciate our two undergrad students, Sonia and Alex, who helped us tremendously with this project. We would have been dead without them. So I very much wanted to appreciate them and salute them now because they're both graduating in this present moment in time.
Thank you, everyone. This is Sarah Breslow again with EarthLab, and we will now move to our next session, Educating for Change. In this session, we'll hear from Melissa Mark and Martha Groom, who direct one of our member organizations, the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program, Gordon Holtgreave, who is directing a new graduate program in freshwater sustainability, Marianne Rosance, a researcher with the Climate Impacts Group, a member org at EarthLab, and we'll be viewing a video produced by Tyler Ung about our Earth Games and Games for Our Future initiative. Tyler was an intern with the former Center for Creative Conservation. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Melissa and Martha. Thank you.
Okay. I think that should do it. Martha is not with me today, but I will go ahead and start. So this is just a quick 5-minute overview into the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program here at UW, which has been supporting scholars since 2014. We have 130 with our current course. So the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program supports emerging conservation leaders to develop unique perspectives and skill sets by drawing connections between biodiversity, individual and community identities, and environmental justice. And our staff includes Martha Groom, the faculty lead, myself, Melissa Mark, the director, and our 2 program coordinators, Angela Berlisle and Nancy Wu. So the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation formed this program in 2014 with the goal of increasing representation of minoritized identities in a relatively homogeneous mainstream environmental field, where this homogeneity of perspectives had resulted in often biased and reductive approaches to problems and practices in conservation. However, while expanding the narrative of who is represented in conservation is valuable and important, this alone does not address how oppressive systems can often be reinforced in environmental work. So our program aims to recruit students into conservation careers and prepare them to navigate these systems, find their place, and ultimately change that narrative. So we endeavor to create a broader view of conservation, one that is biocultural and invokes deliberate action to preserve the integrity of communities and their interdependent members, both human and more than human. As one of our scholars said in some of the interviews that we do, it's not just about the animals and what's natural, it's about the relationships between the environment and the people and how that can be conserved. And we view ourselves always as a very student-driven program. It's what the scholars see as their vision of the future and how they define conservation. So our goal is to build a community of practice that engages in critical analysis of the conservation field, to build approaches that respond to environmental injustice, that connect personal identity to collective action, and that value multiple ways of knowing and doing. Traditionally, we do this by a yearly recruitment of 20 scholars from a variety of majors and disciplines and identities and backgrounds into a 2-year program. And our first summer is an immersive field immersion across the lands and waters of the region, followed by internships with partner organizations in the second summer. Our major challenge, of course, for this year is adjusting this structure to a remote experience, as we will not be bringing scholars to the state of Washington this summer. During these summers and these core parts of our program, we will continue to implement just in a remote learning setting. Will be that we explore a range of conservation practice and practitioners in the Pacific Northwest. We build supportive peer communities that are based on reciprocity and affirmation and deepen our connections both with each other and the non-human members of our natural world. We support scholars with a holistic pedagogy that values intersectional identities. And we develop a sense of agency through analysis of systems and self, and through storytelling and story catching, where scholars find ways to share their voice, their perspective, and their power with the world. And this focus on stories, and I love how many people have mentioned stories so far, because narratives are the way that we explain how the world works. We use them to define what is possible. And when a single narrative takes hold, it can be very hard to disrupt. So a lot of what we do is asking, what are the narratives that we want for our planet, for ourselves? And one that often comes up is this narrative of resilience. What other stories of infinite possibilities are we ignoring by keeping the field as we are? So I wanted to end with a few clips from a conversation that scholars had with one another about what conservation is and could be.
They all look the same to me. Every person who's in conservation, they all kind of seem the same or look the same or sound the same or talk about the same things.
But do they look like you?
No, they don't look like me at all. Not even the person in my head. She looks nothing like me or anybody I see. I think that's that's the problem. But I wish she looked like me. You know, that's another reason to be a part of this career path. Because I wish she looked like me.
We're not following one big idea. You're following your own idea, and you're putting it in, and it's getting mixed in with all the other ideas. And together, I guess they make it one whole big concept of conservation.
You can find the rest of the video at that link, which I'll put in the chat. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Melissa. Gordon Holdgrave.
Share screen. All right, thank you very much for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining today. My name is Gordon Holdgrave. I am the director of Future Rivers. This is a new program to innovate graduate student education in freshwater sustainability. And I want to start by acknowledging my partners in crime here. This is a group of not only amazing faculty at the University of Washington, but people who are really committed to both making their own science usable and actionable, but also training the next generation of scientists. So let's advance here. So I want to start by just describing that, believe it or not, University of Washington has a really long and incredibly impressive history in freshwater science. Just one example of this is the Alaska Salmon Program, which it started in 1946. Looking at the role of freshwaters in supporting sustainable salmon populations. That program continues to this day and has trained hundreds and hundreds of students. And along, this is the salmon example, but there's all sorts of just incredible expertise and a strong history of freshwater science and ecology, hydrology and hydrodynamics, geomorphology, freshwater biogeochemistry, and waterlawn policy. It's really an impressive history. University of Washington is definitely a center of excellence. And in recognition of this, a number of years ago, a group of faculty got together and formed what was called the Freshwater Initiative. And really the goal here is just to kind of get all this great work that's being done at the University of Washington and find a cohesive structure around it and get people talking to each other and get people working together. And this history of freshwater science continues to this day. What's changed are the people, not necessarily the quality. The quality is still amazing, but we've also expanded our scope. And we are now really very much international in what we do. We have strong basis in Washington State and the Pacific Northwest, but we also have incredible projects looking at different aspects of freshwater sustainability, literally all around the world. And so as part of the Freshwater Initiative and part of this recognition that the UW is really a leader in this kind of work, we surveyed the graduate students and asked them, hey, how can we do a better job as faculty giving you what you need in terms of graduate education? And they were loud and clear in what they wanted. And they wanted a number of things. And we went out and raised the money from NSF to come up with this plan to deliver on what these students wanted. And this is called Future Rivers. It's our interdisciplinary graduate training program on river sustainability. Our first cohort comes in the fall, and they spend about 18 months in our program. Some of the students are funded, and through that time, others are not, but we have resources to support students in a number of ways. And in doing this program, they're going to get experience and education in a number of things. And these are all things that they have requested. Students identified they really want to be able to tap into the data science revolution and develop new technical and data science skills that are marketable after they leave the University of Washington. And so as part of their trainer program, they're going to do coursework that leads to a data science certification, a stamp on their transcript that says, hey, they've got skills in data science. They also want to foster interdisciplinary integration and international science in their research work. And we've provided that through on-campus seminars to bring in people from outside the university to talk about freshwater sustainability. We have new interdisciplinary graduate course aimed at how do you do international science? How do you do interdisciplinary science? And we also have one of our flagship events, which is our Summer Institute. And this is where we get our students and our partners and our faculty together in a place, Friday Harbor Labs, or maybe Pack Forest, or maybe overseas in the Mekong. We put them together and we come up with a problem that we think we can solve, and we put our heads together and we work on it from an interdisciplinary perspective. It's kind of the capstone of the group, of the project. Our students want to improve their science communication skills. And so we have relatively small, short one-day science communication boot camps, or if it's something students really want to dig in on, we've got opportunities for larger workshops. Increasing cultural awareness among and inclusivity among the faculty and the students. We're working with a group on campus that's going to help us improve our equity and diversity and inclusion as a group. We're going to have quarterly meetings to talk about these issues, and then we're going to have annual workshops. And finally, the students really wanted to network. They're looking out at their future career. What are we going to do after we leave the University of Washington? And they want opportunities to network with partners. And so we have that with our Data Science Showcase events. The Summer Institutes are going to involve our partners. And we also have some career development workshops. So it's a plan to try to really give a holistic education to our grad students before we send them out into the world. That's it. We're starting this fall. And with our first cohort, it's a 5-year project. We're excited. There are a number of partners in here, and I only scratched the surface of what we hope to do. And I look forward to giving you more information in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. I'd like to now welcome Mary Ann Rosance with the Climate Impacts Group.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Marianne, a postdoc at the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, and I'm going to share work we're doing to train early career researchers. The Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center is a federal university partnership hosted by the Climate Impacts Group that produces relevant and accessible science on climate change impacts and adaptation actions for Northwest natural resource managers and policymakers. And that means we focus on developing science and science products that decision makers and communities can use to inform their work to respond to climate impacts. For example, how to prepare forested communities from the impacts of increases in wildfire, how to restore salmon habitat, or how to prepare coastal communities for sea level rise. And while many things need to be done to meet the demand for decision-relevant climate science, one thing we need to do is transform the way we train scientists so they have the skills and experience to work with communities to produce usable climate science. And so most science training follows the vision that a scientist works independently, gets an idea, conducts research, and then puts it out there into the world as a peer-reviewed publication. And we hope that a decision maker finds that paper and uses it to inform their decisions. In reality, however, this rarely works. A decision maker may never find that research, or it may be totally irrelevant to their context. And unfortunately, most science training continues down this path. So we need scientists instead that are capable of continual engagement with decision makers and relevant communities throughout the science creation process, from developing the project to sharing the results. And in our training program, we recognize 3 important things that this new kind of scientist needs. So academia is very good at training people to be experts in their field, and we augment this by funding graduate students and postdocs to collaborate with resource managers and other communities on their science. And we provide training and support for collaborative research skills through courses, webinars, one-on-one coaching, and other activities. And then finally, researchers also need a community of practice to be able to continue doing this type of research. And we do this through engaging in peer-to-peer learning and connecting fellows to a broader network of scientists and resource managers. So far, we've had 3 cohorts with a total of 32 fellows spread across our 6 consortium universities. And these fellows have worked with over 50 different organizations, including federal government agencies such as the U.S. Geological Survey and the Forest Service, as well as state, tribal, and other entities. And the fellows collaboratively produce science that will help managers make decisions. So for example, one student created a household fish consumption survey in collaboration with the Macaw tribe to help with community resilience planning. And we've been evaluating the effectiveness of this model as well as other activities at the Northwest CASC using various metrics and methods, including pre and post surveys. And so in a post-course evaluation survey, one fellow who identifies as a biophysical scientist shared, "This seminar broadened my perspective in collaborative work and provided me with more tangible skills to approach transboundary research. It challenged me to think hard about my work as a scientist and inspired me to move forward in my career toward applied research that has meaning beyond scientific inquiry." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I'm now going to share a video about the Games for Our Future project that I've helped co-organize and which is now being led in terms of the UW collaboration by Dargan Frierson in atmospheric science. Tyler Ung, a former intern, produced this great video about the work. And let's see if we can.
The Pacific Science Center has something new to offer every day in the realm of modern science. And earlier this April, climate scientists, game developers, artists, and musicians all took part in creative solutions in environmental communications. The unconventional collaboration between academics and games resulted in something marvelous: Earth Games.
The time is now 6 p.m. and Pacific Science Center is now closed.
Welcome to our Earth Games 2018 Games for Our Future Surviving Climate Change Game Jam.
I think you'll have a great jam, you'll learn a bunch, you'll probably walk away with a pretty cool project to put in your portfolio, and maybe, if we're lucky, we'll change some minds about climate change.
During the day when we're open to the public, families can just wander through and check out what a game jam looks like. One big element is kind of demystifying what the process of making something looks like.
We're in this field of serious games. I'm talking about games that have the ability to change people's behavior, change how they believe, what they believe about things, and change what they do.
The thing that games do that is unique is that they allow us to engage in other people's experiences.
What if we could all go to the woods to live deliberately?
We had about 50 participants come and divide up into 10 teams and work on some pretty amazing games they came up with in 48 hours.
We're all too busy panicking ourselves to evaluate it.
Hi, I'm Nate. I'm with the team who made Drought Burger. Drought Burger is a burger shack simulation game played during a drought, and instead of paying for your burger ingredients with dollars, you pay in water.
We really become trapped by a sense of inevitability about the structures that shape our lives. And I think that really the arts of imagination are a really powerful way to draw on word, on story, and on images to help us envision alternatives. For those of you who are game developers, you are storytellers.
But to just say, like, I'm gonna come here this weekend and try and make something that is like designed to send a message.
One of the kind of guiding principles of the Science Center is to be a community laboratory in the living room. I think kind of Game Jam hits both of those things. As a laboratory, we get to kind of think about how we can solve these amazing problems. As a living room, we're really creating an amazing space for these conversations.
I think that the ideal is if the science can inspire new things that are interesting from a gameplay perspective. Environmental games are very much in their infancy. So there's so many games that are needed, right? And that's why the Jam is very, very exciting to me.
This level of collaboration between researchers and creatives holds great potential to revolutionize the way we communicate about systemic issues. With such diversity present at this year's Game Jam, everyone has a place to make a difference. Maybe it's even something you want to be a part of.
And it's my pleasure to introduce Amy Snover with the Climate Impacts Group, directing the Climate Impacts Group as our first speaker in that series. Amy, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks folks for coming back from break and joining us today. So my job here is to introduce the Climate Impacts Group and the work we do. So I want to begin by a bold statement, which I think is very true. Climate provides the foundation of life as we know it. Because of climate, we have immense rainforests along the coast, cold, clear mountain rivers where salmon run, and dry forests and sagelands across the eastern part of the region. Climate defines our natural systems, from how much water we have where and when, to which creatures thrive where. It also shapes many aspects of society. What we grow where we get our electricity from, how much it costs, our activities, even our identity. But climate change is in motion, and its effects will be felt over the coming decades, regardless of reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. We're on track to have a new climate here in the Northwest, a climate that will be different than the climate that our communities, infrastructure, economies, and ecosystems are accustomed to, that they were designed to align with. By the 2050s, the average year in the Northwest will be warmer than the warmest year of the 20th century. Climate change is going to bring more droughts and floods, more wildfires. It's going to stress the ecosystems that live here and worsen invasive species, pests, and diseases. Climate change is going to affect all regions, ecosystems, and every sector of the economy. Climate change will shift. In fact, it is already shifting the foundation on which all of nature and society stands. But the exact nature of that future isn't written yet. Our actions today and tomorrow matter. The faster and sooner we reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the smaller and more manageable the consequences of climate change will be. And the more we recognize and prepare for the inevitable consequences of climate change, the more manageable those consequences will be, the more climate resilient we will be. So building climate resilience, or working to ensure that people and nature thrive in a changing climate, is the work of the Climate Impacts Group. What keeps us up at night is recognizing that every single day, decisions and investments are being made by governments and businesses, communities and individuals that will either exacerbate or ameliorate the risks of a changing climate for decades to come. How wide should the new bridge be to withstand the floods of the future? Which coastal habitat is important for preserving salmon as rivers warm and sea levels rise? How can rural communities ensure sustainable drinking water resources in the face of increasing drought? So we work directly with decision makers across the region to ensure that critical decisions like those are made in a way that's consistent with climate science and climate science-based climate risk management. We're also the host of the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, which you just heard about from Mary Ann. This is one of 8 Department of the Interior regional climate adaptation science centers that together serve every state in the nation. The Northwest CASC is a federal university partnership of the USGS, University of Washington, and 5 other universities. And it works to support resource management in the face of changing climate by advancing understanding and application of climate impacts information. So both of these centers work to ensure that we are developing science that's not only useful, but actually used to build climate resilience. So we begin with this development of science. We need to know what the likely consequences of climate change for life in the Northwest are in order to prepare for those changes. We need to know something about the relative efficacy of different ways of responding to those impacts. So we do this science, and we shape the science we do by the evolving needs of local, regional, and national decision makers, planners, and resource managers, folks who work for cities and counties and tribes, NGOs, and private industry. So you'll hear in a moment from Guillaume Mauger, who will be talking about our developing increased understanding about flooding risks. It's not enough to know what the future looks like if we're not motivated to act on that future. And individuals are motivated to change their behavior or take action on an issue if they believe it's an issue that warrants addressing, that it's an issue they can affect, and if they believe they will be supported or rewarded for their action. So we work to build motivation. We raise awareness of climate risks and response options, and we build motivation amongst important regional actors to address those risks through our active outreach and engagement program by amplifying the success stories of regional adaptation actors. So in a typical year, we will engage in hundreds of face-to-face engagements, from one-on-one to one in hundreds, describing climate impacts and sharing the story of how to effectively build resilience. In 1 year alone, we spent almost 2,000 hours in our team of 12 folks, interacting with folks to help share the story and build motivation. And you'll hear the results of this work when Harriet Morgan talks about some exciting applications of the science we've been involved in local planning. Okay, we also recognize that supporting the use of science is just as important as developing it in the first place and requires just as big of an investment. Addressing climate resilience often requires new knowledge, skills, and additional resources that organizations typically haven't put towards it. More money, more time, more people. Organizations may lack technical know-how in order to access, analyze, and apply climate information. So we work to increase their capacity by providing new tools and training. You already heard about the sea level rise data visualization tool that Heidi described. And we also train graduate students like Marianne Rosance just described. Finally, people can't address climate change and prepare for its impacts in their professional capacities as planners or resource managers if the laws, regulations, and policies hinder them. And we know this is often the case because our laws, regulations, and policies were built for the climate of the past. And so for that reason, we also work to ensure that decision makers have the necessary authority to enable actions that promote climate resilience. And Mead Crosby will be giving an example of work that actually hits on all aspects of these climate resilience building blocks. So as we look at this moment in time, we know that the urgency of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and preparing for global warming has never been greater. Every moment we don't reduce emissions, we lock ourselves into greater impacts. And every moment that we don't prepare for those impacts, we lock ourselves into greater vulnerability. The hard news is we haven't done nearly enough to prepare. But the good news is there's a massive amount of preparation going on around the region, and everyone who lives in the Northwest can be proud of this region for the good work our communities are doing to apply climate science in their decision making. They've shown us how to start. We just need to continue to support them to build the resilience that we all are hoping for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Before we proceed to Harriet, I was remiss in not sharing the slide of the section. So I wanted to share that now with all of you and provide a very quick intro to the speakers in this section. We just heard from Amy Snover, Director of Climate Impacts Group. Next, we will hear from Harriet Morgan and Guillaume Mauger, both researchers with the Climate Impacts Group. And finally, in this session, we will hear from Terry Klinger and Jan Newton, who direct the Washington Ocean Acidification Center, which is another member organization of EarthLab. Thank you, and Harriet, you're on.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So today I'm going to be talking about how sea level rise projections can influence design. So sea level rise is forcing us to rethink how we live next to the ocean, and many of Washington's coastal communities are designed under the assumption that water levels along our coast do fluctuate within some range, but that range is typically defined by how much it's varied historically, and very rarely does it account for projected changes in sea level. And as a result of this, many of our coastal communities in Washington state are vulnerable to coastal hazards. And these are only going to get worse when we bring sea level rise into the equation. So you heard from Heidi Roop earlier, who talked about a set of sea level rise projections that the Climate Impacts Group helped put together back in 2018. So let's keep those in mind and let's take a trip. So we're going to go down to Tacoma, and specifically we're going to be focusing on Owen Beach. So this is a super popular gravel beach, and it's actually one of the few public coastal access points within the city. And on a warm, sunny day in Puget Sound, this park is bumping, the parking lot is full, there's a long line of children sneaking away from the snack shack, and there's lots of people grilling in the pavilion and shelter. But if you take a closer look at the park, you'll realize that it's in pretty significant need of a facelift. There's always a very long line at the bathroom facility. The snack shack is supported by this crumbling retaining wall, and realistically, the pavilion is just too crowded to be enjoyable. And Metro Parks Tacoma is actually aware of all of these issues, and they're currently working on an Owen Beach improvement project to help tackle some of these challenges. So here's Metro Parks Tacoma initial site design for the Owen Beach Improvement Project. On our left side of the renderings, we see some existing facilities. So this is the snack shack. On our right side of the screen, we have our existing shelter. And in the center of the screen, we have our two new proposed facilities, the new shelter and the new restroom. Now, initially, Metro Parks Tacoma did not take any sea level rise projections into the design of this rendering. But when they heard about our sea level rise projections, they said, hey, what would your data look like on this site? And that's exactly what this pink horizontal line is showing you here. So this pink line is looking at 2.6 feet of sea level rise on top of a storm surge event. Now you can see that while the new facilities that they're proposing here aren't projected to be inundated, Metro Parks Tacoma felt like this wasn't a conservative enough design. They felt like it wasn't sending the right message to the community about how the city is approaching resilience. So they took our sea level rise projections and they actually went back to the drawing board. And so this is the sea level rise influence design. So you can see here that they've broken up the new shelter and the restrooms, and they've actually pushed them back away from the shoreline at the expense of a little bit of parking, which is pretty impressive for a city park. And now you can see that there's a much greater distance between the projected sea level rise and the new building. And so Metro Parks Tacoma has actually finalized this as the design that they're going to move forward into construction, which will be taking place over the next year or so. And by incorporating sea level rise into design, they're helping to ensure that the investment they're making today in resilience will continue to serve the city of Tacoma for at least 50 years in the future. And while there's never going to be a one-size-fit-all solution for building coastal resilience, I think this case study is a really nice example of how scientists and decision makers can work together to build coastal resilience within our state. Thanks.
Thank you, Harriet, and Guillaume, who I believe is joining us from France today. Guillaume.
Sorry about that. I am now unmuted. Okay, so I am going to jump right in. And the first thing I just wanted to mention is that the title of my talk is nearly a direct quote from some collaborators after I had shown them the projections we had developed for the location we were looking at. So let me, I wanted to start with this picture here. Even though my work goes beyond flooding in rivers and looks also at stormwater and coastal flooding, I think it's a nice illustration of the confluence of interests and issues that come together when you start to talk about flooding. Flooding is, by far the most expensive natural disaster in the U.S. But it's also, floodplains are also where a lot of the most valuable agricultural lands are found, and also really valuable habitats and ecosystems, both within and adjacent to the river. So I want to start by talking about the three main factors the three main ways that climate change influences flooding. And the first is snowpack. As we get less snow, we get more rain, which leads to bigger floods. Second is rainfall. Models are projecting more intense heavy rain events in the future. So those are going to lead to greater flooding. And the last one is sea level rise, which of course is going to increase the amount of flooding in coastal areas. So I've got two examples of projects that we've done recently that are our attempt to create usable and useful information around the impacts of climate change on flooding. So the first is we created some future flood maps in a collaboration with the Snohomish Conservation District and the Nature Conservancy. And the thing that's significant here, because it seems like a pretty obvious thing to do if you're talking about future flooding, is make maps of what it is it's that we haven't really been able to do it until recently. This is one of several recent projects we've been involved in where we could. But for the past 20, 25 years of climate change impacts research, most of the studies have only been able to specify the amount of water that's coming down, but not where that water is going. So it's kind of a big deal that we can do it, and it's useful, much more useful information like this because people can look on the landscape where the impacts are happening. Just to orient you a little bit here, this is zooming in on just one small part of the area covered by the modeling, the lower Snohomish River Basin. Our project covered the entire Snohomish and the Stillaguamish River Basins. You're looking at the lower Snohomish. Everett's there on the left-hand side of the map. So below the screen is Seattle, and above the screen, Marysville and the Tulalip Reservation. And what we're looking at here is the 10-year flood event, which is the flood that has a 1 in 10 chance of happening in any given year. Those blue shadings are the depth of water, so that's showing flooding. It's the current event. And on this tool, you can go to that link and check it out. You can scroll forward. So this is mid-century, same event, mid-century, and end of century. And you see the depth and extent go up. So I can go back and forward and give you another look as well. Snohomish Conservation District's using this in their ag resilience plan right now, which came out last spring, and the discussions are ongoing about what to do and how to incorporate, what to do about this information. So next example is some work we've been doing on culverts. And this is just showing a little video of navigating a prototype tool we created the idea being to help designers and planners have the information they need to design a culvert that accounts for the effects of climate change. So we have this form that a person can fill out based on a particular creek that they're looking at for a culvert. You put in the width of the creek, the amount of time they want the culvert to be operational, and how big they're thinking they want to design the culvert. And this tool calculates the likelihood that it's going to meet, or in this case, not meet the regulatory standard by throughout its lifespan. So the percent number is your percent chance that you won't meet the standard. So a 0% is a good score here. And so this allows folks to zoom around and look at different parts of the state or whatever part is applicable, and then put in their ideas of culvert size and get an outcome from that. We're currently working on an update with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so this is just step one in that process. And I want to just mention one last thing before going on. My two examples here were really about quantifying impacts, trying to make the information useful. There's a complementary set of analyses that we're just starting to do in one of our projects, where we're actually looking at more of a bottom-up assessment of the sensitivity to climate change impacts, or how much change would have to happen to matter. And combining those two, I think, is really going to be useful. So hopefully I'll be able to talk about that next time. All right, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guillaume, Terry, and Jan. I'd like to introduce you, and you're on.
Okay, hi there, everyone. This is Jan Newton, and with any luck, you can see my screen and the slides. There we go. All right, so it's my pleasure to talk to you today about the Washington Ocean Acidification Center, and I'll be giving this presentation on behalf of Terry and myself. She'll be monitoring the chat, so we look forward to your questions and inquiry either now or as follow-up. And what I want to tell you about is what we are doing in order to get science to support Washington's response to ocean acidification. And it is about the content, but also the way that this occurred and the way that it was done. That's, I think, what's so inspiring to us. Okay, so first off, let's start with what is ocean acidification, in case you may not be entirely familiar with that. So we all know CO2 enters the atmosphere, and excess CO2 building up into our atmosphere from carbon emissions is what is leading to climate change, increased temperatures, etc. But some of that, roughly between a quarter and a third, enters the ocean. And so when it diffuses into the ocean, it changes the water chemistry. And it gets really technical, and I'm not going to give you any equations, but two of the responses are to lower the pH of the seawater and also the availability of carbonate ions. And carbonate ions are important for certain organisms who use calcium carbonate to make their structures. So like, for instance, an oyster shell. Okay, so that's ocean acidification in a nutshell. That's a global process, as you can see here, and this shows the change in pH projected from 1850 to 2100. But what you can see is that change is not homogeneous across the globe. And places where the ocean, where the deep waters come up, known as upwelling, those are having early vulnerabilities. And that was really the Pacific Northwest. And so we have strong upwelling, we have a lot of dependency on various calcifying organisms like oysters, Dungeness crab, etc. So we were really one of the first to encounter this. And here's the picture that is just so vivid. So the person who's speaking with his hands out is Bill Dewey. He works for Taylor Shellfish. And as the title here says, the shellfish industry spurred action. It was really the ability of the shellfish growers and the scientists working together to realize that that's what was causing a change in their ability to produce oyster stock. And then to communicate. And look at the people who are listening to him. Former Governor Christine Gregoire, and behind her all the state agencies. Billy Frank Jr., an Nisqually elder, and behind him the tribes both on the coast and the Salish Sea, who really listened to this great leader. And Jane Lubchenco, who at that time was the administrator of NOAA, and we have really strong NOAA collaboration here in Washington State. So there were some important people listening, but it wasn't that they just listened, they took action. And Christine Gregoire, Governor Gregoire, assembled a blue ribbon panel, and without going into all of the details, the diversity on that panel was a cross-cut of what you see here, plus a few scientists, Terry and myself included, who were able to articulate what we needed for the Washington State response, and some of that was science. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about 3 things that the Washington OA Center is doing in order to get that science that then decision makers can utilize to decide our response. So first of all, it's about the biology. And while the focus early on was on oysters and plankton, in our now 4th funded biennium of existence, the Washington OA Center is funding research on salmon, of course, which is so central to the Pacific Northwest, forage fish, which are critical in that food web, and then harmful algae, because there's evidence from laboratory studies that increased CO2 can enhance the production of harmful algae. We're studying the changes in water chemistry in the natural environment, as shown by this buoy. We also go out on ship cruises to do surveys. We're also looking in the hatcheries, and here you see Taylor shellfish with their monitoring equipment in their hatchery. We're learning a lot from both of these sources of information. And lastly, we're developing forecast tools, and this is output from a live ocean forecast model developed at the University of Washington. And it shows you, red is, I'm just gonna say, it's bad conditions for growing oysters. Willapa Bay right there that you can see is where a lot of oysters are produced, not only for the state of Washington, but nationwide. And so being able to see when the winds and the currents are sending that low aragonite saturation state water into Willapa Bay is critical. So we're not only funding the science, but we're also making sure that people can access it. So here you can see output in a different manner, but the same model on the NANUS data portal. And this output is available to the public every day. It's updated, and it's critical that we're having the conversations with the Marine Resources Advisory Council and others in the state of Washington about the status of ocean acidification on our shorelines, and also what the information on biology and the models tell us might be good decisions to make going forward. So with that, I'm sure I'm over time, and I'll pass the baton. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan. And as soon as you stop sharing your screen, I will go ahead and share mine. Okay, thank you so much to the speakers in that session. We're going to move to our next session. Before we do so, I wanted to let everybody know, speakers and audience alike, that we are running a bit over time. We are currently 10 to 15 minutes behind, and that's not surprising. It is difficult to create such fast talks. So I'm hoping that I can ask for your generosity with your time and stay until about 3:15. Our next session is Fostering Human Environment Resilience. We're going to be hearing from Jane Calderbank, a former intern with me at the Center for Creative Conservation, which was a previous member organization of EarthLab that was merged into EarthLab a couple years ago. We'll hear from Josh Lawler and Star Murray, director and manager of the Nature and Health program, which is a member organization with EarthLab. We'll hear from Nancy Simcox, who leads one of our innovation grants. We'll also hear from Courtney Bobson and Bernard Borman with another one of our innovation grants. We'll hear from Sarah Hammond and Joyce Lecomte, who received incubator grants from the Center for Creative Conservation. And we will hear from Jeremy Hess, who leads Change, which is a new center here at EarthLab. Thank you, and we will start with Jane.
Hi everybody, my name is Jane. I'm a rising environmental anthropology senior at Reed College. I'll be speaking to research I engaged in as an intern with the Center for Creative Conservation my freshman year. The The title of my work is Epistemological Environments, and my aim was to address the way discipline-specific language creates ecosystems of study within academic environmental science, humanities, and policy. My main finding was that an implicit sense of linguistic rigor, that is, a pressure to conform to knowledge communication norms, jargon, and strict definitions of the objective, meant that scholars from other environmental disciplines lacked access to information and methodologies crucial to making their work actionable. The entrenchment of these norms prevents knowledge networks from forming across disciplines. An emphasis on neutrality prevents environmental academics, especially those aligned with the natural sciences, from demonstrating the social dimensions of their work. The crux of the problem is a matter of legibility. I hold that it's not an issue with the inherent understandability of scientific information, but that media aren't one size fits all. Attention to accessibility, history, nuance, honesty, sensory detail, structural politics, reciprocity, and framing matters in environmental work. In that vein, oversimplifying information for the sake of easy translation is an inadequate solution. It obscures the complexities of the information, hiding from view the process by which knowledge is created. We need a different set of science to convey meaning, one that unites theory and practice. So I turn to art, namely poetry, as an alternative medium to explore ways of phrasing environmental stories and knowledge. Poetry liberated my work from the constraining logic of traditional publication, allowing for me to speak to the essence of human-environment connectivity that motivates much of the environmental studies. The takeaway isn't that everyone should go write a volume of eco-poetry, rather that traditional standards shouldn't discourage us from exploring new means of articulating what we know and how we know it. It's not the information itself, it's the medium. I'm very encouraged by the work of everybody involved with EarthLab and their dedication to using creativity and intention to bridge disciplinary gaps in environmental studies. Thanks to the support of Sarah and the C3 program, I was able to transform my research into a publication, for which I'm immensely grateful. If you're interested in my work, I'd be happy to connect you with this piece or discuss my thoughts in the years since. Since this research, I've been dwelling on the world of Pacific salmon conservation, exploring how language and medium shapes the way we frame our care for fish. I'm currently writing my senior thesis on the semiotics and biopolitics of Pacific salmon management. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Josh and Star, you're up.
I'm Josh Lawler, Director of Nature and Health at the University of Washington. Today, Star Murray and I are going to give you a little overview of what Nature and Health at UW is. So it'll probably come as no shock to most of you that time spent in nature can have positive effects on our mental health, on our physical health, on our well-being, and even on our mood. It's been shown that patients recovering from surgery in a hospital room with a view of trees tend to recover more quickly and use fewer pain meds than patients recovering in similar hospital rooms without a view of nature. Similarly, kids in classrooms with views of trees out the windows tend to recover more quickly from stressful events, potentially having a better learning environment than kids in classrooms without views of trees. And we know that time in nature can reduce stress, it can reduce the symptoms of ADHD, can reduce anxiety, can lower blood pressure, it can improve eyesight, and it can improve birth outcomes, as well as many other things. But we don't know how much time you need to spend in nature to get each of those benefits, nor what types of experiences and interactions with nature are most beneficial. Nor do we know the best ways to increase access to nature and increase equitable access to nature, because we know that not everyone has equal access to nature. Nature and Health is a group of researchers, practitioners, and policymakers who are all focused on better understanding that connection between nature and health and using that understanding to build better programs and policies that improve health and protect nature. We partner with a number of groups, both across the region and across the nation. For example, we're working with the Girl Scouts in Western Washington to look at how increased outdoor programming can improve girls' mental health, increase physical activity, and potentially affect their connection to nature. We've also looked at how wilderness experiences can be used as a treatment for PTSD in vets. Additionally, some of our researchers have explored the impact of outdoor preschools on kids' health, both with the Fiddleheads at UW and Tiny Trees in Seattle. And 3 of our researchers are embarking on a new project to look at the health effects of greening schoolyards in Tacoma. And this isn't a picture of Tacoma, but it is work that was done by the Trust for Public Land, which was one of the 3 groups involved in this project. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Star.
Hi, everyone. So we've had some virtual talks. The Nature and Health Speaker Series convenes practitioners and researchers. The talks have included nature and health during COVID-19, nature interaction and human well-being, the importance of relative wildness in an urban landscape, older adult walking programs in urban parks and indoor environments. And future programming will be based on community members and researchers who bring multiple worldviews to what it means to be with nature. And another talk will be Girl Trek, Washington Trails Association, and the USDA Forest Service, who will discuss their focus groups and mutual interest in trails, health, and inclusive outdoor spaces. And we've also done an annual symposium over the last 3 years, where we convene practitioners and researchers focused on advancing the latest research about human health benefits in contact with nature. Last year, equity in nature was a central theme. This year, we will hold a virtual conference in April 2021 focused on lessons learned from nature and health through COVID-19. And in October 2021, our in-person conference will focus on generating understanding and building a community through advancing the latest research in nature and health. We want to thank you for listening to our presentation. Please stay connected to us through our website, natureandhealth.uw.edu, or email us at natureandhealth@uw.edu. And I will get that in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh and Star. Welcome, Nancy Simcox.
Everyone eats, everyone cleans, and everyone uses chemicals. These are the concepts that brought us together as a team under EarthLab. We are all familiar with different cleaning products out there, especially now during COVID-19 pandemic. But what we might not know is that there's products that have health and environmental risks, such as asthma, cancer, skin conditions, and water pollution issues. It's clear we need a safer chemistry, and we're working hard to get there. During the past decade, there's been a revolution in the design of chemicals for cleaning based on their toxicity and environmental fate characteristics. There's just still a lot more to do. And our EarthLab Innovation Grant provided the opportunity for our experts in occupational health, chemistry, nutritional science, agriculture, and social justice to come together to address not only the health and environmental issues related to chemical and cleaning products, but also access to equity issues facing our communities today. Food trucks remain an entry point for many small businesses, especially immigrant entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, these small businesses may not have access to resources for food safety, occupational health, and safety regulations, or new technologies associated with cleaning. In addition, we know that food service lags other sectors, such as hospitals and janitorial services, in transitioning to safer, greener cleaning technologies. To help close this gap, the Washington State Food Truck Association agreed to work with our team to help shift the industry toward green cleaning. We're exploring ways to improve the adoption of green cleaning and safer chemicals to more underserved and rural communities through partnerships with students at Heritage University and food truck operators in Yakima. Part of our work for this project was to obtain data to determine what food truck operators understand about green cleaning. Our student work conducted interviews with food truck operators in the Yakima Valley and Seattle area and helped us analyze our data. We found that bleach was one of the most common products used for sanitizing and disinfecting, and some of the other products that were listed were vinegar as well. The use of chemicals has a history of unintended consequences of harm to health and the human environment. Regulations dictate how businesses must clean, but doesn't quite clearly provide them with the knowledge on how to make choices within those requirements. For this grant, we're developing a toolkit of resources, like the fact sheets you see now on the screen. And you can actually download with the QR code there if you click on it, this fact sheet for you. And we offer this in English and Spanish, and we're going to be putting together other videos and other programs for the food truck industry. We'll continue to work with the operators in Seattle and Yakima Valley to continue to represent rural and urban perspectives equitably. So what we ask you is to join our Safer Chemistry campaign. Visit a food truck in your community. Look for these labels, the Safer Choice, Green Seal, Designed for the Environment, Eco Logo, when you're buying or purchasing your products. And remember, everyone eats, everyone cleans, and everyone can, with the help of EarthLab, can do these things safely. Thank you very much. Okay.
So thank you so much. And we're going to move right along and hear from Courtney and Bernard. Thanks, Nancy.
Hi, my name is Bernard Borman. I'm director of the Olympic Natural Resources Center out on the outer side of the Olympic Peninsula. I have a very brief task of introducing to you Courtney Bobson, who will talk about a new concept we've been working on, ethnoforestry, and show you how connecting people and forest management and forming new kinds of collaborative partnerships between UW land managers and local people will, I believe, truly transform how forests, particularly young ones, will be managed into the future. Courtney?
Thanks, Bernard. Hopefully you're seeing a large presenter view of my presentation right now. All right. So in 2017, at a canoe dedication ceremony at the Olympic Natural Resources Center, a Hoh tribal elder lamented about the decline in basket weaving plant species that she had seen over the course of her lifetime. And she said she had watched the number and the size of beargrass plants diminish over the last many decades. And as Bernard and I and other people at ONRC had spoke to people on the coast, this was a common sentiment that we ran into. And while the well-being and the livelihood of rural communities is directly connected to public lands management, they have very little say in how those lands are managed. And we'd like to change that through this process of ethnoforestry. So ethnoforestry is a people-oriented forest management system that uses knowledge and input from local people and applies it to the forest management process. We've been using a new framework for ecosystem well-being that gives equal weight to both community and environmental well-being, knowing that there are inherent interactions between the two of them and that people are part of our ecosystems. In a typical managed forest, public lands forest on the Olympic Peninsula, you have tens of thousands of these naturally regenerating seedlings that will be growing alongside planted seedlings after a timber harvest. They're capitalizing on light and space and nutrients that occur after a harvest. Although at the time of timber harvest 50 years later, we really only need 200 or 250 trees per acre. And instead of allowing all of these excess seedlings to grow and compete, we propose actively planting valuable understory species after these timber harvests through this process of ethnoforestry. So in this ethnoforestry management system, plants will be actively added that are valuable to communities, to our environment, and still providing timber revenue. Through this project, we've been working really closely with coastal communities on the Olympic Peninsula, both tribal and non-tribal, to better understand how can land management better meet their needs and enhance their well-being. And mainly this is done through community interviews and informal interviews. We'll be actively planting species that benefit our forests and our environment, especially wildlife, from pollinators to birds to ungulates and more. And all of this will be done while still managing for timber on a roughly 40 to 50 year rotation cycle. This summer, we'll be implementing ethnoforestry trials on the coast near La Push. The photo on your left should be showing one of our recently harvested DNR units that we're going to be using. And on the right is an example of one of a handful of treatments we'll be implementing over the summer. This is considered our agroforestry treatment. and the colored lines indicate different species. And in this treatment, we'll be adding in densely planted understory species in rows to promote harvesting by people in that system. And all of this work will be scaled up in the coming years. Both the community interviews and our ethnoforestry trials will be directly put into a large-scale watershed study that the Olympic Natural Resources and Department of Natural Resources are coming together to create this large-scale experiment. So the implications from this small-scale work will be able to go landscape level in the next couple of years. And going forward and looking ahead, we propose that DNR can change their management strategies to better consider the needs of local people. And these people could be more engaged in forestry and management through their direct input. And this will involve actively growing valuable understory plants along with our timber species that can really enhance people's well-being. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Courtney and Bernard. I would like to welcome Sarah Hammond and Joyce Lecomte.
All right, thank you. Joyce and I have a prepared recording for you, so we're going to get that started.
The Camas Collaborative facilitates meaningful co-stewardship between tribal communities and other caretakers of the Camas Prairies and oak woodlands of Western Washington through cross-cultural research, outreach, and education.
So Camas Prairies historically covered millions of acres along the northwest coast, from southern BC all the way down to the southern Willamette Valley. Indigenous peoples cultivated these habitats for food and other resources for millennia. They used fire to keep the prairies open for hunting and to nurture the over 100 species of culturally significant plants that grow there. The camas bulb is an energy-dense food that was historically harvested in huge quantities to store for winter use and for trade, making it second only to salmon in terms of its trade value. Today, there is a strong desire to reinvigorate camas harvest and consumption in many Pacific Northwest tribal communities. Over the past 200 years, camas prairies and the indigenous stewardship practices that maintain them have been severely disrupted due to initial Euro-American colonization and ongoing settler colonialism. It's estimated that only about 3% of intact prairies exist today. In Western Washington, several plants and animals that depend on these ecosystems are now listed as threatened or endangered. Thus, much of the current human involvement that goes into their care is focused on biodiversity conservation-related goals. Although the once vast camas prairies would not even exist without native stewardship, tribal needs and the rich cultural knowledge about how to maintain them are rarely taken into account.
With the support of our incubator grant, our diverse group, composed of collaborators from academic, tribal, nonprofit, and government entities, work together to identify and begin to address the challenges to both harvesting camas and integrating tribal priorities and practices into prairie management in the South Sound.
To better understand challenges to harvesting camas, we partnered with the nonprofit Feed 7 Generations to hold a convening with 7 local tribes where we identified barriers to putting more camas on the table. To increase access to camas, we've hosted 3 camas harvesting days on public lands with members of local tribal communities. To integrate tribal priorities and practices into prairie management, we are initiating a study to evaluate the effects of camas harvesting on prairie communities, and we're hosting a workshop with Indigenous and non-Indigenous land managers to discuss cultural priorities in camas prairies. Finally, to educate and share knowledge about camas prairie cultural ecosystems, we have developed in partnership with Garden Raised Urban Bounty a camas-specific curricula for K-12 and community educators.
We believe that truly collaborative projects that take the well-being of all who inhabit and rely on camas prairie ecosystems are acts of trust and reciprocity. This work inspires us to rethink our understanding of historic and current human relationships with camas prairies.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah and Joyce. Next, I would like to introduce Jeremy Hess.
Thanks, everybody. I want to start out in these difficult times by congratulating you about your health. we live in a very healthy place. Our lifespan is among the longest on Earth. And here in King County, we in fact are quite healthy compared to the rest of the country, healthier than 95% of the rest of the residents of the US, which is probably not much of a surprise to many of us. But I have to give you condolences as well. We have not done a great job of sharing the bounty that is health in our region. The life expectancy across King County varies by approximately 18 years, which is as wide as the variation across the United States. Here in King County, that's approximately driven by differences in heart disease, but ultimately, roughly 50 to 60% of the differences here are explained by poverty. And there's a question about whether we will continue to make progress in this area going forward. From 1990 to 2014, we had a roughly 5-year growth in life expectancy for both men and women in King County. But we don't know over that same time, period, we lost, we made some progress in ischemic heart disease, for instance, but we lost progress in other areas, particularly related to drug use. And during that same time, the entire country actually had a shortage in its life expectancy related to drug abuse. We are not, can be assumed going forward. This has to do mostly with determinants of health. I'm an emergency physician. I work down at Harborview. And before I send patients back out into the world, I ask a few questions. I ask if they're safe to go from a health standpoint. I ask if they've got somebody who loves them, and if they're able to address all of their needs for food and shelter. And we know that climate change is a significant driver of how we access all of these different determinants of health. In the global health community, we've been sounding the alarm related to climate change and its health impacts for a long time. We highlighted that climate change is one of the biggest threats to global health of the 21st century, but also that it's a tremendous opportunity to pursue health co-benefits of different mitigation strategies. Here you can see that a whole host of different environmental impacts that you've heard about today have potential health impacts as well. Many of these are relevant for people in Washington State. We could spend an entire quarter going through each of these things. In fact, we do in one of my classes. But from a place-based perspective, you don't want to look at individual exposures and individual impacts. You want to do a cumulative impacts assessment. You want to look at all of the environmental exposures that affect a community's health and think through what factors affect its vulnerability and exposure and how those factors are distributed to lead to differences in health impacts like the ones that I just showed you. 2 years ago, Esther Min, a PhD student in environmental and occupational health sciences, worked with this group here to pursue development of an environmental health disparities map. This map has been up and running on the Washington Tracking Network and led to some legislation recently to develop a cumulative impacts assessment related to fossil fuel pollution in Washington State and to climate change health impacts going forward. I've been working with groups, the groups here and with SIG to develop these maps, which will be unveiling by the end of the year. We've taken an inventory from our partners at Front and Centered, focused on exposure related to where people live and on livelihoods and factors that affect vulnerability. We've also tried to take an inventory of strategies that will reduce health impacts going forward through investments in mitigation. Those investments include reductions in pollution related to household energy, changes in how we get around, changes in how we, sorry, I'm having some trouble with my speaker, and changes in how we produce food and eat. The problem is that none of these things translates directly into a policy impact statement for something like the Seattle Green New Deal. So we're bringing together this group of people who worked on the environmental health disparities map, along with Climate Impacts Group and other state agencies, to produce a new generation of the disparities map focused on fossil fuel pollution, one that will allow us to examine individual policies like the Green New Deal, and one which will help us get a better sense of the potential climate change health impacts for Washington communities related to all of the different environmental exposure changes that you've heard about today. These include all sorts of impacts related to heat and work, drought, wildfires, among many others. Our goal, ultimately, is transformational resilience and highlighting the potential for transformational resilience, or the lack thereof, in the policies that our places are considering in response to climate change. Down the road, we expect we will develop this tool for other geographies around the world that are facing similar challenges and may not enjoy the benefits that we have here. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to working with you to incorporate all of this great work into this tool.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Moving right along, our final theme is developing transboundary collaborations and tools. I want to note we are at the 3 o'clock mark and we do have one more session. So thank you for staying with us and hearing the last 4 talks. In this session, we will hear from Mead Crosby, a researcher with the Climate Impacts Group. I will be presenting on some of my work and I'll try to do that as quickly as possible. We will hear from Yoshi Oda, Director of the Nereus program, a member organization here at EarthLab. And finally, last but not least, Tyler Ung, a former intern with me at the Center for Creative Conservation. Mead, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. So here in the Northwest, we are incredibly fortunate that so much of our landscape is still in relatively good ecological condition and still home to so much fish and wildlife and natural resources that are key to our health and well-being in the region. But at the same time, we're seeing our human population booming and the impacts of climate change already being felt across our region with increasing wildfire, drought, sea level rise, and a range of other impacts. The pace and the scale of the changes that we're seeing are making it difficult for our natural resource managers, the folks who manage our natural lands and fish and wildlife, to meet their conservation mission. And this is exacerbated by our natural lands being managed as a patchwork of numerous individual jurisdictions that are acting as islands in a sea of rapid landscape change, when what we need is large-scale coordinated conservation action. The Cascadia Climate Adaptation Strategy is a collaborative regional effort that is designed to address those challenges. The strategy is engaging a broad partnership of scientists and land and wildlife managers from universities, state, provincial, federal government, tribes and First Nations, and non-governmental organizations from across Washington and British Columbia to work together across borders to ensure that our natural systems are resilient to the impacts of climate change. For us to accomplish that, we need to make sure that our decision makers, our land and wildlife managers, are planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating conservation in ways and at scales that are sufficient to support the resilience of Cascadia's natural systems. For that to happen, we need to have land and wildlife managers with the capacity to take action for climate resilience. They need to be coordinated across borders, across international borders, across our multiple jurisdictions to take action in a coordinated fashion. They need to be motivated to act. They actually have to have the authority to take those actions. They can have all the knowledge and motivation, but they might not have the authority to actually do anything about it. Then they need to have the money to be able to take those actions. A lot of these can be pretty expensive, like putting in highway wildlife crossings, for example. You need to have the money to do these things. And so this might look a little familiar to you. Some of these, if you were here for Amy Snover's talk, this is inspired by the UW Climate Impacts Group theory of change. And so the Cascadia Climate Adaptation Strategy seeks to identify conservation actions that can be taken to support each of these 5 necessary enabling conditions for a resilient Cascadia. And it seeks to do this through a collaborative, inclusive, equitable process that values and integrates both Western science and indigenous knowledges and values. And it's also aimed at identifying where natural resource managers should take action, given that we have limited conservation resources and a large, rapidly changing landscape. And so we are partnering with Google to build a powerful new tool to support this work by providing land and wildlife managers with always up-to-date information about our rapidly changing landscape using satellite imagery and other information so they can better understand how climate change is affecting the landscape and fish and wildlife populations and where their collective actions will make the most difference. The result will be a plan for working together across borders to ensure a connected, resilient landscape for the Cascadia region, its natural lands, its fish, its wildlife, and the people who depend on them. So thank you, and thank you so much to all of the folks who've been supporting this work so far.
Thank you. Thank you, Mead. And I am going to quickly present on some work that I did funded by the Puget Sound Partnership, the state agency responsible for cleaning up the Puget Sound. I'm Sarah Breslow. This is work that I did with Leah Kintner, the regional manager of the Puget Sound Partnership. So environmental problems are always people problems, in my view. It's people who experience and perceive them as problems. It's people who cause the problems. And it's really only people who can solve them. And yet in the environmental and conservation fields, we predominantly hear from physical and natural scientists in describing and addressing environmental problems. As a social scientist in the environmental field, I still feel like I'm in the vast minority. And to address that situation, I worked with Leah to lead the Social Science for the Salish Sea project, which was to develop a social science research agenda for research that could inform the human dimensions of ecosystem recovery in the Salish Sea region. We pulled together a 12-author team from across the Washington, British Columbia region and from a wide range of social science disciplines, and 28 advisors representing an additional breadth of institutional and community perspectives. We met 3 times over the last year, and we did a lot of brainstorming as to what we thought were some of the major social questions and topics that needed addressing. Some photos. We used a matrix to organize the notes resulting from those meetings into themes and to identify knowledge gaps. And we organized those subsequently into major goals for ecosystem recovery. So here are four of the major goals and sub-goals. Our resulting agenda was 33 social science research topics that we recommended, but how could we prioritize these for implementation and funding? We asked the full group in a survey to rank these, and according to urgency, fundability, ability to raise social science awareness, and what was most needed by ecosystem practitioners. The #1 by far top priority topic was about how climate change affects the well-being of Salish Sea communities. The other top 5 topics were these that hopefully you can see on my screen. And you will have to read the report to learn about the other 33. This work is being used to inform the work plan of the Puget Sound Partnership and the statewide Floodplains by Design project, and we're hoping to publish on it soon. And now I would like to quickly discuss the Salish Sea Equity and Justice Symposium that I had a very small hand in organizing. This was an event that took place in November at UW. Hundreds of people attended. It convened leaders from all types of environmental professional backgrounds to provide an intentional space for how to comprehensively integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion through their operations and environmental work. Among many themes and lessons were the importance of organizational leadership to advance equity and justice, the importance of development and growth pathways, the inclusion of multiple knowledge systems, and empowering community. And for more information, please visit the website and send an email to the organizers. This was the amazing group of organizers on that project. Thank you. And Yoshi, yes, Yoshi.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, I suppose you can.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, right, sorry about that. So my name is Yoshi Ota. I'm a research assistant professor at School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, and I'm also director of Nippon Foundation Ocean Nexus Center. There's program that in the program is the effort I previously led, and now we are embarking upon a new program in EarthLab. And I'm going to talk about why I started this new initiative and while explaining what we're going to do with Nexus Center. Okay, so the title of the talk, Ocean Equity and the Future Oceans, is really about what we see now and what we want in the future. What we see now in the ocean is really inequitable response to changing marine and coastal environment, and also economy and society. The marine and coastal environment is rapidly changing its ecology and environment due to climate change and other development efforts. Economy is really pushed forward with new initiatives globally considered as blue economy, which is really pushing the to make money out of the ocean space, and also society in a way that the governance itself is rapidly changing in terms of management policy. So what we like to see in the future is really just close disparity in access, benefit, and representation, and the values which has been widened due to this inequitable response to the changing marine coastal environment, economy, and society. But what we are missing as a piece is there is a gaps in ocean governance. Hence, what we like to do in Ocean Nexus is really address the issue of the gaps in ocean governance, putting social equity in the center of the ocean governance, creating evidence and tools to provide new way of looking into the ocean, governing the ocean, and also capacity and the network, which including human capital management, as well as the global network in interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary way. And all these is really from my previous work, which is Predicting Future Ocean Layers program, which was being published in Elsevier on the right-hand side of the corner. So what we're going to do in the Nexus, we really like to look at the societal issues of the oceans. That's how we take it. Human security, ocean economy, public health, and social identity. Those are 4 core pillars of our research topics. And research topics coming from social responsible seafood, addressing the slavery in the ocean, coastal social safety net. Currently, it's a lot of fisheries are quite affected by the COVID. And what are the safety net they got? Plural values, equitable allocation of transboundary fisheries in the Western Pacific, ocean acidification, adaptation of coastal shellfish fisheries, small-scale fisheries representations in fisheries governance, particularly looking into Europe, gender, indigeneity in ocean governance, and also impact of China's Belt and Road Initiative in Southeast Asia. Those are really looking into 4 different ranges: human security, ocean economy, social identity, and public health. So this Ocean Nexus at UW EarthLab is a 10 years initiative. We got MOU signed with Nippon Foundation, bringing resource to work on fellowship programs, interdisciplinary research, developing innovative ocean network, and science policy communication. As a result of that, what we like to see as an outcome is establish comprehensive understanding of equity in ocean governance, developing research to create applicable evidence for policies and actions, and create thought leaders to advance new perspective and build tools, and finally develop critical narratives and deliberate communications. This effort can be done on our own, so we have quite like support from University of Washington, from Evans to the Public Health Information School, and College of Environment, and obviously SMEA, my department. And also we have international collaborators from UBC, Cambridge, and a bunch of those people, those institutions. This is an effort that I'm really looking forward to work collaboratively with other EarthLab friends, and hopefully we are embarking upon new initiative much more actively once the current situation on the COVID is getting less impactful on our research. Finally, I just wanted to say that we are actually now producing this adaptive research methodology, COVID-19 pandemic. And this is research for the junior resources for junior researchers in ocean equity. And we're hoping to publish this or make it available, at least the first draft, in next month also. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to working with you. Bye.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Yoshi. And finally, last but not least, Tyler Ung.
Right. So I might be reading into this a bit much, but with social distancing still in place in most municipalities, does it already start to feel like you're being judged if you aren't wearing a mask in close quarters, or it's unusual seeing large gatherings or even like people hugging? It seems like what once came instinctively is changing. And this small behavioral shift was a reminder that the immobilizing rhetoric of that's just the way things are is reductive. We are not indebted to stay with any conventional systems of society. We have agency in defining new normals. Though we all may hold criticism on how governments and some social groups have been responding to the pandemic, ultimately we're experiencing a modern intergenerational demonstration that global action is possible. But as we know, a lot is still unresolved. COVID-19 unveils the chronic inequalities of our societies and infrastructure, and is at some capacity a result of poor environmental stewardship and delayed climate action. Despite the novelty factor of coronavirus, information flows still face the same barriers that climate change has endured for decades. Misnomers and falsification of information all become fuel for conspiracies, political propaganda, and a severely disillusioned public that distrusts legitimate science. And this narrative tells us that whether COVID or climate change, conventional dissemination of science to inform policy and people's behavior is just not enough. Fortunately, based on all of these talks, we are seeing a significant shift. The level of creativity across groups like EarthLab demonstrates the value of communicating science through both academic and cultural lenses. I was honored to participate in a few sub-projects that break traditional silos within institutional research. And there's growing recognition and opportunity in activating science-based art across values, contexts, and mediums. From the design of greener cities to the innovation of new technologies, art and design is responsible for the systems and processes we interact with on a daily basis. Some might argue that we should be investing in practical, rational solutions, not wasting time on creatives and moral obligations. But I think of science-based art like a couple where opposites attract. Have I been watching too many Bollywood romance films? Probably, but stick with me. Though flawed by themselves, they are complete with each other. It does not diminish the objectivity of research or lessen the conceptuality of art, but instead reinforces each with new perspectives. So when I think about what a livable future requires, I see environmentally anchored design as a global practice and a value system. I see a livable future where designers and creatives are just as much a member of institutions and labs as the environmental researchers themselves. As agents of our own work and narrative, let's consider what we can do to share our visions of a new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. That was a beautiful conclusion to our showcase. I am so proud of you and the other interns. Just a quick shout out to Tyler Ung, Jasmine Remgotra, and Jane Calderbank, who were featured here. And I want to now offer some thanks. Thank you to those EarthLab staff who helped organize this showcase: Lindsay Heaney, Constance McBaron, Jessica Nagtalan, and all the staff at EarthLab who helped make this possible and have been working behind the scenes to make the Zoom call what it is. I want to thank all of the speakers. We gave you a very tall order, 3 to 5 minutes, creative. This is not typical for us researchers and academics. You did a really spectacular job. I'm totally inspired. I'm a bit overwhelmed by the wealth of research and knowledge and creativity that you've showed us here and brought forth into the world. Thank you to Ben for leading EarthLab. And thank you to all of you for participating and for staying a little longer than we expected today. We really, really appreciate it. We hope you will join us. And I'm just going to share one more screen. We have a number of other events that will take place in the coming year, and you can find out about those at earthlab.uw.edu. You can also join our weekly or our quarterly mailing lists. Come find us via our email addresses or phone numbers right now. Thank you to everybody who attended. Thank you to all the speakers and the organizers. We did it. So I hope Sarah. Thanks, Ben. Take care, everybody. And I hope to be in touch. Please reach out. Have a wonderful afternoon. We'll see you next time.